Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are here for another one of your questions about work. And I feel like the context for this answer is going to be exciting here on day 226. So those of you who are here with us for the first time, I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work, and a company in which we invested, which is now called Doma, yesterday began trading on the New York Stock Exchange. And Christopher Morrison, who is the COO, saw the entire, is that the official title? Did I get that right?
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good. We first talked, I think, before you started, because you were in a job at a professional services firm at McKinsey,
Yep.
and you had either just decided to start or were like in the final moment of deciding.
Yeah,
and we had this conversation back then, which was what, 5 years ago now, about the question today, which is, I'm in a corporate job that I like. That's a pretty good job. It's stable, whatever. And then you got this startup that has like 4.5 people. What do I do? And so would love, and thank you for joining, would love any context on how did you and how does one think about transitioning from a great job in a stable organization to the wild and wacky world of early stage startups?
Yeah, totally. And thanks for letting me share some thoughts, for whatever they're worth. And I do remember that. I actually do remember that, Roy. I remember us sitting in a park in San Francisco, sharing a cup of coffee while I was asking, I think you, some version of this question.
I have no idea what I said. So
I actually do remember it, and maybe I'll make a mental mark and I'll have some. A little bit of suspense here. If I remember, I'll mention what you shared with me. So I think this is a question that a lot of people wrestle with. And a lot of people, especially now as, the sort of startup, the startup flywheel continues to spin. I was thinking about this, and
it's no longer a weird thing to do that you can't explain to your friends. You may still struggle to explain it to your mother, but not your friends.
Exactly. Your parents will still wonder, what it is that you're doing and whether or not you're moving into the basement, but, your friends will think it's a cool thing that you're doing. So, I think about this moment that was probably midway through the second semester of my sophomore year of college, actually. And I was so stressed because I had brought to college the same mentality that I had developed in high school, which was that the point, at least of the academic part of school, was to get a good grade.
Mm-hmm.
What you were trying to do was study really hard so that you could master the subject material well enough to ace the test, or in my case, maybe not ace the test, but do okay.
Sure.
And I was so stressed, and I remember I'm sitting there, and because I was in school in New England, it's like freezing outside, it's probably sleeting, and I'm like, what am I doing? I don't really want to study for this test, but I am pretty interested in what I'm learning. And so I said, forget it. I'm not going to worry about how this test goes. I'm just going to focus on learning this as well as I possibly can. And a funny thing happened, which is all of a sudden I started doing a lot better in school and having a lot more fun. As an aside, in hindsight, I do recognize that some older folks in my life, including my parents, had tried to teach me this lesson, but there was no chance I was going to learn it at that point.
And let's also face facts. It's not like that lesson always is a good idea, right? Plenty of times you try to, and sometimes you do just have to, there's not that much joy in studying for the SAT for the sake of studying.
Totally. And the reason I start with that anecdote is I think, when I reflect back on, my time in sort of a stable corporate environment, which for me was working at a consulting firm called McKinsey, I think the first, for me at least, 4 years or so in that environment were all about that. They were all about learning to improve yourself and your ability to work with others and drive towards impact. And at first that's, how do you think about structuring, a complicated, ambiguous problem? And how do you drive analysis to derive insights? Then it's how do you work with others? How do you build teams? How do you build other people?
Group your arguments in groups of 3, essential life skills.
Exactly. All of the
align things vertically in a PowerPoint slide. I get it.
Yeah, exactly. How do you format various shades of blue? And I think, I think there came a point towards the end of my time at McKinsey where it shifted from how do you become a better version of yourself to how do you study for the test of progressing in this environment? How do you study for the test of getting a promotion? And I think that point happens in just about every corporate context where there's a period of intense learning where you're developing a ton of really exciting skills. And that's really, I think that can be intoxicating in a lot of ways.
Totally.
You're constantly
You're building
leveling.
superpowers. Your muscles are getting bigger.
Exactly. And then at a point, that learning curve, it starts to plateau. And that's the point at which you have to ask yourself, what am I going to find energizing here? Am I going to be energized by studying for the test and going from being, an AVP to a VP, or a VP to an SVP, or an SVP to an EVP, or whatever that hierarchy is? Am I going to be motivated by that? Or am I looking to continue to challenge myself as it relates to developing new skills that are derived from new experiences in new environments?
Now, hold on. So let me just say so that's really valuable. And so what I hear you saying is this is a skill I learned at McKinsey, repeating back what the person said, is that you went from this environment of like fast growth of development in yourself, that kind of intoxicating feeling like when you're a student of learning for the sake of learning, to just trying to crack the system. But there are many things one could do in that moment. One could say, hey, I'll go back to school. Or one could say, like, I'm going to go to another corporation where maybe there'll be a different learning curve. And so the choice to do it in a startup is a really particular choice. What drove that particular kind of choice for you?
Yeah, so for me, it was a bit of a suspicion, in some ways actually reinforced by some of the guidance that you gave me, almost about 5 years ago, which, is that a startup by necessity is a constantly changing set of circumstances. The advice you gave me when we were sitting in that park all those years ago was, you said, Christopher, the only way that this is a bad experience is if this startup doesn't start up. And I think that was spot on. And what you were trying to tell me, at least my interpretation at the time, was the only way that this is not an experience that creates that long-term growth trajectory is if it's just not growing at a pace that's going to afford you a set of new experiences and challenges that will continue to force you to be uncomfortable, question yourself, and grow and develop in new and unpredictable ways.
Yeah, I mean, so I would still agree with my past self, which I don't always.
That is good. Consistency is good.
In the language of startups, one way of saying what I meant is, if you're pre-product market fit, there's not that much learning that happens. It's like you're trying to strike flint and tinder and hoping something works. And also, I would say it's not true of every startup, but in this case, I knew you'd be around good people. I had a hunch you'd be compatible with them, and blah blah blah. Yeah. And the trajectory that I hear, and I'll insert the privilege disclaimer here, which is like, here we are, like two white guys talking about a range of all wonderful options. Absolutely. And practical considerations abound, right? Like, if you need to make a mortgage payment, you need to make a mortgage payment. And startups pay more now than they used to, but that may or may not be the issue. But setting aside those considerations for a moment, for somebody who can make this choice, and I think the set of people who can is growing every day, which is great. One way I think about it is, you start your career and you have some hunches about what you're interested in, but in a way you're mostly focused on just developing yourself. And I do think joining a startup with a healthy culture, post product market fit, is the reason I love working with startups. Is I think it's an unambiguously wonderful learning opportunity, because there's always more to do. There's always a new challenge. You very rarely get to relax into, well, like, okay, this thing's going to work. Let me figure out how to crack the system of how to get a different job. And then the interesting thing that I also think happens, and you had this, I think, to a degree with your DOMA experience, is it's not just a job where you learn, but at some point you think, wait a minute, I actually know enough stuff that I'm ready to learn, not about how to improve myself, but how to improve things out there, change the world, improve an industry, however you might look at it. And at that point, leading in a startup, sometimes in a corporate environment in the right role, though many leadership roles in corporate environments are really more about making recommendations than anything else. But leading, if you own a P&L in a corporation, you might be in the same place to some degree. But then that to me is the line where leadership in a startup starts to happen. And the reason I mention it is just to say, not all startup roles, of course, are created equal. and you stepped into a role that was a hybrid of a get it done role and a leadership role. And so that had particular qualities to it. Some folks may not be in that hybrid role, but the earlier you go, the higher chance that like, hey man, like I think about guys like Jesse Kaplan, who knew what he was going to do, but he ended up doing something useful, it seems, and maybe several somethings over time as the roles evolved. So I think that is great, not advice. I don't know. I do think I was probably giving you advice then, and not because I knew you well enough to really know, but I knew the CEO where you were going.
Yep.
I knew the kind of circumstance you'd been in. And then the other thing that I just think about is, it's always worth thinking about downside. And had it not worked out, you were surrounded by people who had kind of taken a bet on you and wanted to do right by you, as long as you were in good standing. And you're more valuable to whatever McKinsey client might have otherwise hired you anyway, having done this.
Sure.
So it works all around, and I'm thrilled. And I hope that Domo will continue to give you learning opportunities for a long time. I certainly plan to hold my shares for a very long time. So,
me as well. And I think that there is something that you're tapping into there when you say, the goal of startups is to do something different, to make a meaningful change and a meaningful impact. And I think, that means, almost by definition, that there's always tremendous opportunities for you to put yourself in new and challenging situations to force growth and development.
I love that.
In a way that, not only benefits, yourself as building that foundation of, skills and capabilities and relationships, but also ultimately, hopefully leaves a very positive impact on the organization that you're involved in, the market that you're in, and the community you participate in.
And yourself, the best way to change yourself is to change things out there. You learn and grow. All right, well, that was awesome not advice. For anybody who's watching for the first time, the reason we call it This Is Not Advice is because we're not telling you should do X. I mean, the circumstances are different, but telling our own stories and sharing our experiences in the hope that we'll be able to offer some lessons from them. And the questions do come from things that folks out there are asking. So feel free to ask and comment. And Christopher, come back to be continued.
Awesome.
Thank you.